Welcome, weary traveler of the mind, to a journey not through dreams, but through the waking nightmares of human understanding. Tonight, we will delve into the shadowed archives of psychology, exploring experiments so profound, so unsettling, that they laid bare the very fabric of our nature. These are not tales of monsters under the bed, but of the monsters within us and within the systems we create. Prepare to drift into a world where the line between observer and observed blurs, where the search for truth often revealed a truth too terrifying to fully grasp. As the world outside quiets, let your thoughts settle, and allow the echoes of these stories to guide you into a restful, if perhaps a slightly more reflective, sleep. The genesis of inquiry. For centuries, the human mind remained a fortress, its inner workings a mystery guarded by philosophy and speculation. But with the dawn of modern science, a new ambition emerged: to systematically probe the depths of consciousness, to quantify emotion, to understand the very mechanisms of thought and behavior. This era, spanning the early to mid-20th century, was a crucible of bold ideas, driven by a fervent belief that empirical observation could unlock the secrets of our inner world. Yet, in this pursuit of knowledge, ethical boundaries were often tested, sometimes broken, leaving a legacy of profound insights intertwined with a chilling reminder of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and extraordinary curiosity. Tonight, we will revisit these pivotal moments, not to judge with the wisdom of hindsight, but to understand the forces that shaped them and the indelible marks they left on our understanding of ourselves. The Milgram Experiment. Our first descent into the unsettling truths of human behavior brings us to the early 1960s, a time still grappling with the shadows of World War II and the Holocaust. How, many wondered, could ordinary people commit such unspeakable acts? Was it inherent evil, or something else entirely? It was this profound question that haunted Stanley Milgram, a young social psychologist at Yale University. He designed an experiment, seemingly simple in its premise, that would send shockwaves through the scientific community and forever alter our perception of obedience. He wanted to understand not just how, but why individuals would follow orders that conflicted with their own conscience. The stage was set for a chilling revelation about the power of authority. Milgram's experiment was meticulously crafted, a masterclass in psychological deception. Participants, recruited through newspaper ads, believed they were joining a study on memory and learning. Upon arrival, each participant was introduced to two other individuals. One, a kindly-looking man in a white lab coat, the experimenter. The other, a pleasant, middle-aged man who would be the learner. Unbeknownst to the true participant, both the experimenter and the learner were confederates, actors in Milgram's carefully orchestrated drama. The roles were seemingly assigned by lot. One would be the teacher, the other the learner. Rigged from the start, the true participant was always assigned the role of the teacher. This initial setup, seemingly innocuous, was the first layer of a complex ethical dilemma, designed to place ordinary people in an extraordinary moral bind. The room itself, sterile and functional, offered no comfort, no escape from the unfolding scenario. The core of the experiment revolved around a formidable-looking apparatus, the shock generator. This imposing device featured a series of 30 switches, clearly labeled with voltage levels ranging from 15 volts, marked slight shock, all the way up to a terrifying 450 volts, ominously labeled XXX. Beneath these labels were verbal descriptions of increasing intensity, from moderate shock to strong shock, very strong shock,
intense shock, extreme intensity shock, danger, severe shock, and finally, the ultimate XXX. The teacher was given a sample 45-volt shock, a brief, sharp jolt, to ensure they believed the machine was real. This tactile experience cemented the illusion. In an adjacent room, the learner was strapped into a chair, electrodes attached to his arm, visible through a small window. The instructions were clear: administer a shock for every wrong answer, increasing the voltage with each subsequent error. The stage was now truly set for a psychological drama of unprecedented intensity, where the perceived reality of pain and the command of authority would clash. As the experiment progressed, the learner in the adjacent room would intentionally make mistakes. With each error, the teacher was instructed to deliver an increasing shock. At 75 volts, a grunt would be heard. At 120 volts, a cry of pain. At 150 volts, the learner would demand to be let out, protesting his heart condition. As the voltage climbed, his cries became more desperate, more agonizing, until at 300 volts, he would pound on the wall, refusing to answer further. Beyond this point, an eerie silence would fall. The teacher, often visibly distressed, would turn to the experimenter, seeking guidance and escape. But the experimenter, impassive and firm, would deliver a series of 4 standardized prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, you have no other choice, you must go on. These simple phrases, delivered with unwavering authority, were the psychological chains binding the teacher to their unsettling task. Milgram's results were, to put it mildly, deeply disturbing. Before conducting the experiment, he surveyed psychiatrists, college students, and middle-class adults, asking them to predict how many participants would administer the maximum 450-volt shock. The consensus was bleak. Only a pathological few, perhaps 1 in 1,000, would go all the way. The reality shattered these predictions. In Milgram's initial study, an astonishing 65% of participants, 2/3 of the teachers, administered the full 450-volt shock. These were ordinary people, not sadists, not monsters, but individuals from diverse backgrounds, all experiencing profound distress, yet continuing under the experimenter's command. It revealed a chilling capacity for obedience, a willingness to inflict perceived harm under the directive of an authority figure, even when it violated their deepest moral convictions. It forced the world to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil acts are not always born of evil people, but can be facilitated by the subtle yet powerful influence of hierarchical structures. The moment Milgram's findings were published, a firestorm erupted. The ethical implications were immense and immediate. Critics accused Milgram of inflicting severe psychological trauma to his participants, many of whom exhibited extreme stress, anxiety, and even physical reactions during the experiment. They felt deceived, coerced, and deeply disturbed by their own actions. The use of deception, the lack of informed consent regarding the true nature of the study, and the potential for lasting psychological harm became central points of contention. Was the pursuit of knowledge, however profound, worth the potential cost to individual well-being? The debate raged, forcing psychology to re-examine its ethical guidelines and eventually leading to stricter protocols for human subject research. Yet Milgram himself defended his work, arguing that the debriefing process, where participants were reunited with the learner and the deception was revealed, was thorough, and that follow-up surveys showed most participants felt they had learned something valuable about themselves. But the scar on the conscience of psychological research remained, a testament to the experiment's controversial power. Milgram conducted numerous variations of his original experiment, each designed to isolate specific factors influencing obedience. He found that factors like the proximity of the learner, the proximity of the experimenter, the legitimacy of the authority figure, and even the presence of dissenting peers significantly altered the rates of obedience. When the experimenter gave commands by phone, obedience dropped. When the learner was in the same room, obedience dropped. When two other teachers, Confederates, refused to continue, obedience plummeted. These variations underscored that obedience was not an inherent trait, but a complex interplay of situational forces. The Milgram experiment, despite its ethical controversies, remains one of the most cited and influential studies in social psychology. It forced society to confront the uncomfortable truth about the human capacity for blind obedience, offering a chilling explanation for historical atrocities and providing a cautionary tale that continues to resonate in discussions of power, authority, and individual responsibility. It reminds us that the line between good and evil is often not a fixed boundary, but a shifting landscape influenced by the context in which we find ourselves.
The false memory implantation. From the external forces shaping our social interactions, we now turn to an even more intimate and disturbing aspect of the human mind, the malleability of memory. Imagine believing with absolute certainty that you experienced an event that never actually happened, that your deepest, most personal recollections could be subtly yet powerfully altered or even entirely fabricated. This is the chilling reality explored by Elizabeth Loftus, a pioneering cognitive psychologist, in her groundbreaking work on false memory implantation. Beginning in the 1990s, Loftus and her colleagues conducted a series of experiments that would profoundly challenge our understanding of memory, revealing its fragile, constructive nature. Her work demonstrated that our memories are not perfect recordings of the past, but rather dynamic, reconstructive processes surprisingly susceptible to suggestion and external influence. It's a journey into the unsettling truth that our personal histories, the very narratives that define us, can be subtly rewritten, blurring the line between what was and what we believe was. One of Loftus's most famous experiments, conducted with Jacqueline Pickerel, was the Lost in the Mall study. Participants were presented with 4 short narratives about childhood events, 3 of which were true and provided by family members, and 1 of which was entirely fabricated, being lost in a shopping mall as a child, crying, and being rescued by an older person. The participants were asked to recall details about each event. Remarkably, about 25% of the participants recalled the false lost in the mall memory, often adding vivid details that were never provided in the original narrative. They truly believed this event had happened to them. The researchers achieved this by subtly suggesting the false memory, telling participants that a family member had confirmed it, and encouraging them to try hard to remember. This experiment provided compelling evidence that false memories, complete with emotional and sensory details, could be successfully implanted into a person's mind, demonstrating the powerful influence of suggestion on autobiographical memory. Loftus and her team conducted numerous other studies implanting a variety of false memories into participants. They successfully convinced people that they had, for example, spilled a punch bowl at a wedding, had a run-in with a dangerous animal, or even had a serious childhood accident requiring a hospital visit. The techniques were consistent: subtle suggestion, often framed as information from a trusted source, like a family member, combined with guided imagery and repeated attempts at recall. The key was to make the false event plausible and to create a supportive environment for remembering. These experiments reinforced the idea that memory is not a static recording, but an active, constructive process. Every time we recall a memory, we are, in a sense, reconstructing it, making it susceptible to new information, suggestions, and even our current beliefs and desires.
The implications are profound, suggesting that our personal narratives, the very bedrock of our identity, are far more fluid and vulnerable than we instinctively believe. The implications of false memory research extend far beyond the laboratory, having a profound and often disturbing impact on the legal system, particularly concerning eyewitness testimony. Loftus's earlier work demonstrated how leading questions could distort eyewitness accounts of car accidents, with different phrasing eliciting different estimates of speed. Her work on false memories further highlighted the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. Innocent people have been wrongly convicted based on confident yet entirely false memories of witnesses. Conversely, genuine victims of abuse have had their true memories dismissed due to the pervasive skepticism about memory's accuracy. The research forced a critical re-evaluation of how evidence is gathered, how interrogations are conducted, and how much weight should be placed on a witness's confidence. It revealed a chilling truth that the very mechanism designed to help us recall the past accurately can, under certain circumstances, betray us, leading us to confidently remember events that never occurred, with devastating real-world consequences. Another highly controversial area touched by false memory research is the phenomenon of recovered memories, particularly in the context of therapy for childhood abuse. During the 1980s and 90s, many therapists used techniques like guided imagery, hypnosis, and dream analysis to help patients recover repressed memories of abuse. Loftus's work, however, raised serious concerns that some of these therapeutic techniques, while well-intentioned, might inadvertently be implanting false memories rather than recovering true ones. This led to a heated debate, often called the memory wars, between those who championed the validity of recovered memories and those who warned against the dangers of false memory syndrome. While it is undeniable that genuine repressed memories can exist and be recovered, Loftus's research underscored the ethical imperative for therapists to employ techniques that are evidence-based and minimize the risk of creating false recollections, particularly when dealing with such sensitive and traumatic subjects. It's a reminder of the profound power of suggestion, even in the context of healing, and the delicate balance required to navigate the landscape of memory. Elizabeth Loftus's research on false memory implantation has fundamentally altered our understanding of human memory. It has moved us away from the idea of memory as a perfect video recorder and towards a more nuanced view of memory as a constructive, dynamic, and surprisingly fallible process. While her work has been controversial, particularly for its implications in legal and therapeutic settings, its scientific rigor and profound insights are undeniable. It reminds us that our personal histories, the very stories we tell ourselves about who we are not set in stone, but are constantly being re-edited and reshaped by new experiences, new information, and even subtle suggestions. This realization, while potentially unsettling, also offers a profound understanding of the fluidity of the self and the importance of critical thinking when recalling our past. As you drift into the quiet, consider the intricate dance between reality and perception and the ever-shifting landscape of your own personal story. We have confronted the unsettling truth that our own minds, the very seat of our consciousness and personal history, can sometimes act as an unreliable narrator. The memories we hold dear, the stories we tell ourselves, are not always perfect reflections of reality, but rather intricate tapestries woven with threads of truth, suggestion, and reconstruction. This realization, while potentially disorienting, is also a profound invitation to approach our own recollections and those of others with a gentle skepticism, a compassionate understanding of memory's inherent fragility. It reminds us that empathy often begins with acknowledging the subjective nature of experience and the subtle ways in which our past can be shaped by forces beyond our immediate awareness. As the night deepens, let this understanding bring a quiet peace, a recognition of the beautiful, complex, and sometimes mysterious nature of the human mind. As our journey through these unsettling psychological experiments draws to a close, we are left with a profound, often uncomfortable understanding of the human condition. We have peered into the depths of obedience, conformity, inaction, learned despair, the innate need for connection, the ease of prejudice, and the astonishing malleability of memory. Each study, in its own controversial way, has illuminated fundamental truths about who we are, not just as individuals, but as social beings profoundly shaped by our environments, our histories, and each other. These are not merely academic curiosities, they are mirrors reflecting the potential for both darkness and light within us all. They remind us of our inherent vulnerabilities, but also of our incredible capacity for resilience, empathy, and change.
The Robber's Cave Experiment. From the individual's inner world and institutional influences, we now broaden our scope to the dynamics of intergroup relations. Our next journey takes us to the summer of 1954, to a secluded summer camp in Robbers Cave State Park, Oklahoma. Here, Muzaffar Sharif, a pioneering social psychologist, conducted a groundbreaking experiment that would shed light on the origins of prejudice, conflict, and cooperation between groups. At a time when theories of prejudice often focused on individual personality traits, Sharif proposed a different hypothesis, that conflict between groups arises not from individual pathology, but from competition over scarce resources and conflicting goals. To test this, he orchestrated a naturalistic field experiment with unsuspecting young boys, creating conditions that would foster both fierce intergroup rivalry and, ultimately, harmonious cooperation. It was a powerful, real-world demonstration of how easily us versus them mentalities can emerge and how they can be overcome. Sharif carefully selected 22 normal, well-adjusted 11-year-old boys from similar backgrounds, ensuring they were strangers to each other. They were brought to the remote Robbers Cave camp, unaware they were part of an experiment. In the first phase, the boys were divided into two groups, approximately equal in size, and kept separate for the first week. Each group quickly bonded, establishing their own norms, leaders, and distinct identities. They chose names for themselves, the Rattlers and the Eagles. They worked together on camp tasks, such as building cabins and preparing meals, fostering strong in-group cohesion and loyalty. This initial phase was crucial for establishing a sense of us within each group, a shared identity and camaraderie that would later be tested. The boys, unaware of the impending rivalry, were simply enjoying a typical summer camp experience, forging friendships within their respective groups, setting the stage for the dramatic experiment to unfold. In the second phase, the two groups were introduced to each other, and a series of competitive activities was initiated. These activities included baseball games, tug-of-war, and other contests with highly desirable prizes awarded to the winners. The competition quickly escalated into fierce rivalry.
The boys began to exhibit strong in-group favoritism and out-group hostility. They called each other names, raided each other's cabins, and even burned each other's flags. Verbal insults turned into physical altercations. The once well-adjusted boys, who were strangers just days before, now viewed the other group as enemies. Sharif observed that simple contact between the groups, without shared goals, actually increased hostility. Even when a common non-competitive activity like watching a movie was arranged, it devolved into food fights and insults. The experiment vividly demonstrated how easily competition for resources and status can transform two groups of ordinary individuals into hostile adversaries, creating deep-seated prejudice and conflict. Having successfully created intergroup conflict, Sharif then sought to understand how to reduce it. Simple appeals to morality or mere contact between the groups had proven ineffective. He then introduced a series of superordinate goals, tasks that required the cooperation of both groups to achieve. For example, the camp's water supply was sabotaged, requiring both groups to work together to fix it. The camp truck broke down, necessitating a combined effort to pull it up a hill. Initially, old hostilities resurfaced, and the boys often reverted to blaming and insulting the other group. But as they were forced to collaborate to solve these shared problems, their attitudes slowly began to change. They started to communicate, to rely on each other, and to see the members of the other group not as enemies, but as necessary partners in achieving a common goal. The shared struggle, the mutual interdependence, gradually began to erode the ingrained prejudice and foster a new sense of cooperation and camaraderie. By the end of the experiment, the boys from the Rattlers and the Eagles groups had largely overcome their animosity. Friendships began to form across group lines, and the boys willingly shared resources and helped each other. The superordinate goals had successfully transformed them from hostile rivals to cooperative partners, demonstrating the power of shared objectives in reducing intergroup conflict. The Robbers Cave experiment provided compelling evidence for Sharif's realistic conflict theory, which posits that intergroup conflict arises from actual or perceived competition for limited resources or incompatible goals. More importantly, it offered a powerful blueprint for conflict resolution. To reduce prejudice and foster cooperation, groups must be brought together to work on tasks that require their mutual interdependence, tasks that transcend their individual group identities and necessitate a shared purpose. It was a profound lesson in the dynamics of human conflict and the pathways to peace, demonstrating that even deeply ingrained animosity can be overcome when common ground is actively sought and built. The Robbers Cave experiment remains a cornerstone of social psychology, its findings highly relevant to understanding prejudice, discrimination, and conflict in the real world, from schoolyard bullying to international relations. It underscores the importance of creating opportunities for intergroup cooperation and shared goals in diverse societies. It reminds us that conflict is not always an inherent human flaw, but often a product of situational forces, particularly competition. The experiment, while involving deception and some emotional distress for the participants, is generally considered ethically acceptable by the standards of its time, given the profound insights gained and the lack of lasting harm. Its lessons continue to inform strategies for promoting peace, understanding, and reconciliation in divided communities and nations. As you settle into the quiet of the night, consider the power of shared purpose and the hope it offers for bridging even the deepest divides between us. we have witnessed the subtle yet profound threads that connect and divide us. The arbitrary lines of prejudice, the powerful pull of group identity, and the transformative potential of shared purpose. These experiments, though born of specific historical moments, speak to universal aspects of the human condition, reminding us that our social world is a complex tapestry woven with patterns of conflict and cooperation. They urge us to look beyond superficial differences, to understand the forces that drive division, and to actively seek the common ground that can foster connection and empathy. As the world outside grows still, allow these insights to gently expand your understanding of human relationships, finding comfort in the knowledge that even in the face of division, the capacity for unity and understanding always remains within reach.
The monster study. From the societal construction of prejudice, we now turn to an equally unsettling and deeply unethical exploration of how negative labeling can profoundly impact an individual's self-perception and behavior. Our next journey takes us to the Iowa Soldiers' Orphans Home in 1939, to a study so controversial it became known as the Monster Study. Conducted by Wendell Johnson, a prominent speech pathologist at the University of Iowa, and his graduate student Mary Tudor, the experiment aimed to investigate the causes of stuttering. Johnson, who himself stuttered, believed that stuttering was not an organic disorder but a learned behavior, a consequence of negative labeling and anxiety. To test this hypothesis, they embarked on a study that would deliberately inflict psychological harm on vulnerable children, leaving a lasting scar on the history of speech pathology and psychological ethics. It was a dark chapter, illustrating the devastating power of words and expectations. Johnson and Tudor selected 22 orphaned children, ranging in age from 5 to 15, as their subjects. Crucially, some of these children had existing speech impediments, while others had perfectly normal speech. The children were divided into 4 groups. 2 groups consisted of children who stuttered. One group received positive therapy, being praised for their fluency, while the other received negative therapy, being criticized and ridiculed for their speech errors. The most ethically egregious part of the experiment involved 2 groups of children with normal speech. One of these groups received positive therapy, being praised for their already fluent speech. The other, however, received negative therapy, despite having no speech impediments. These children were repeatedly told they stuttered, that their speech was bad, that they should be careful not to speak unless they could do so perfectly. This deliberate and systematic negative labeling of children with normal speech was at the heart of the experiment's ethical controversy, a direct attempt to induce a speech disorder through psychological manipulation. The results of the negative therapy on the children with normal speech were devastating. These children who had previously spoken fluently began to exhibit signs of speech problems. They became withdrawn, self-conscious, and anxious about speaking. Some started to stutter or developed other speech impediments, while others simply refused to speak at all. Their academic performance suffered, and their social interactions diminished. The constant criticism and the repeated assertion that they had a problem, even when they didn't, profoundly impacted their self-esteem and their perception of their own abilities. The experiment provided chilling evidence for Johnson's hypothesis that negative labeling and psychological pressure could indeed induce a speech disorder. It demonstrated the immense power of external validation, or invalidation, to shape an individual's identity and capabilities, particularly in vulnerable children. The monster study
revealed a dark truth about the fragility of the human psyche when subjected to systematic psychological abuse disguised as therapy. The monster study was kept secret for decades, largely due to concerns about its ethical implications and the potential damage it caused. It was only in 2001 that the University of Iowa publicly apologized for the experiment, and the surviving subjects received some compensation. The study is now universally condemned as a grave ethical violation, a stark example of research that prioritized scientific inquiry over the well-being of its human subjects, particularly vulnerable children. It highlighted the critical need for strict ethical review boards and informed consent in psychological research. While the study did contribute to the understanding that psychological factors can influence speech disorders, its methods were inexcusable. The legacy of the monster study serves as a perpetual cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the profound and lasting harm that can be inflicted by unchecked scientific ambition and the devastating power of negative words and labels. As you drift into a quiet slumber, reflect on the gentle strength of encouragement and the enduring damage of unkindness.
The blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. From the intricate workings of individual and group psychology, we now turn to an even more sensitive and potent aspect of human behavior, the genesis of prejudice and discrimination. Our next exploration takes us to a small, rural Iowa classroom in 1968, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Jane Elliott, a third-grade teacher, was grappling with how to help her predominantly white students understand the pain and injustice of racial discrimination. Disturbed by her students' inability to grasp the concept of prejudice, she devised a controversial yet profoundly impactful exercise that would simulate the experience of being a minority. This was the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment, a powerful, raw demonstration of how easily arbitrary differences can be used to create division, how quickly prejudice can take root, and how devastating its effects can be, even among innocent children. Jane Elliott began her experiment by arbitrarily dividing her third-grade class based on eye color. On the first day, she announced that blue-eyed children were superior to brown-eyed children. She attributed various positive traits to the blue-eyed group. They were smarter, cleaner, and better behaved. The blue-eyed children were given special privileges: extra recess time, first access to the water fountain, and praise for their achievements. The brown-eyed children, conversely, were labeled as inferior, dumber, dirtier, and less capable. They were subjected to strict rules, such as not being allowed to play with the blue-eyed children, and were often reprimanded for minor infractions. They were forced to wear collars around their necks to make them easily identifiable. The transformation was immediate and chilling. The superior blue-eyed children quickly embraced their new status, becoming arrogant, condescending, and even cruel toward their brown-eyed classmates. The inferior brown-eyed children, in turn, became withdrawn, anxious, and performed worse academically. The arbitrary assignment of a simple physical trait had, within hours, created a powerful hierarchy, demonstrating how easily prejudice can be manufactured. The following day, Jane Elliott reversed the roles. She announced that, in fact, brown-eyed children were the superior group and blue-eyed children were now inferior. The rules, privileges, and labels were switched. The brown-eyed children were now praised and given special treatment, while the blue-eyed children were subjected to the same discrimination and restrictions they had imposed just the day before. Again, the transformation was swift and profound. The newly superior brown-eyed children quickly adopted the same arrogant and discriminatory behaviors that the blue-eyed children had exhibited.
The blue-eyed children, now experiencing the sting of prejudice themselves, became disheartened, their academic performance suffering, their confidence eroding. This reversal provided an even more powerful lesson. It wasn't about the eye color itself, but the arbitrary power assigned to it. It showed how readily individuals, regardless of their past experience, could internalize and act upon assigned social roles, demonstrating the pervasive nature of prejudice and the ease with which it can both be inflicted and endured. The immediate impact on the children was profound. Those who were labeled inferior experienced genuine emotional distress, frustration, and a noticeable decline in their academic performance, even on tasks they had previously mastered. The superior children, conversely, displayed increased confidence and often performed better on tasks. The experiment vividly demonstrated how quickly arbitrary labels could affect self-esteem, behavior, and even cognitive abilities. More importantly, it provided the children with a visceral, first-hand understanding of what it felt like to be judged, discriminated against, and subjected to unfair treatment based on an immutable physical characteristic. They experienced the emotional pain and the psychological burden of prejudice, an experience that transcended mere intellectual understanding. Jane Elliott's experiment, though controversial for its emotional intensity, achieved its goal: to make the abstract concept of discrimination a tangible, unforgettable reality for her young students, a lesson that would stay with them long after the colors were removed. Jane Elliott's blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment has been replicated and adapted countless times, not just in classrooms, but in corporate diversity training and adult workshops. While its methods are ethically debated, particularly for the potential psychological distress caused to children, its effectiveness in demonstrating the arbitrary and destructive nature of prejudice is undeniable. It showcases how easily stereotypes can be formed, how quickly power dynamics can emerge from superficial differences, and how profoundly these dynamics can impact individuals. The experiment serves as a powerful, visceral reminder that prejudice is often a learned behavior, a social construct that can be dismantled through awareness and empathy. In a world still grappling with issues of discrimination, the lessons from that Iowa classroom in 1968 remain chillingly relevant, urging us to look beyond superficial differences and to recognize the shared humanity that binds us all. As you drift to sleep, let the quiet understanding of this lesson foster a deeper sense of connection and empathy.
Harlow's monkey experiments. From the profound influence of learned experiences on our sense of control, we now shift to an even more fundamental aspect of human, and indeed primate, development: the critical need for comfort, security, and attachment. Our next stop is the 1950s and 60s, to the controversial yet groundbreaking work of Harlow at the University of Wisconsin. At the time, prevailing psychological theories, particularly behaviorism, suggested that the bond between an infant and its mother was primarily driven by cupboard love, the mother's role in providing sustenance, food. Harlow challenged this purely biological explanation, proposing that contact comfort, the warmth, softness, and security provided by physical touch, was far more crucial for healthy psychological development. To test this radical hypothesis, he conducted a series of ethically contentious experiments with rhesus monkeys, experiments that would reveal a heartbreaking truth about the profound, innate need for love and connection, and the devastating consequences of its absence. Harlow's experimental setup was both ingenious and heartbreaking. He separated infant rhesus monkeys from their biological mothers shortly after birth. Each infant was then placed in a cage with two surrogate mothers. One was a wire mother, constructed from wire mesh but equipped with a feeding bottle that provided milk. This mother provided sustenance, fulfilling the cupboard love hypothesis. The other was a cloth mother,
also made from wire, but covered in soft terry cloth, providing no food, but offering warmth and a soft surface for clinging. If the prevailing theory of attachment was correct, the infant monkeys should have spent most of their time with the wire mother, as she was the source of nourishment. However, Harlow's observations revealed a profoundly different and deeply moving truth. The design of this experiment created a stark choice, a clear test of whether physical comfort or mere sustenance was the primary driver of the infant-mother bond. Harlow's observations were unequivocal. The infant monkeys spent the vast majority of their time, up to 17 or 18 hours a day, clinging to the soft cloth mother, only venturing to the wire mother briefly to feed. When frightened by a novel stimulus, such as a mechanical toy or a loud noise, the infants would immediately run to the cloth mother, burying their faces in her soft fur, seeking comfort and security. They would then, from the safety of her embrace, explore the new object, eventually gaining confidence. The wire mother, despite providing essential nourishment, offered no such comfort, and the infants rarely sought her out for anything other than feeding. This demonstrated beyond a doubt that contact comfort was a far more powerful determinant of attachment than mere sustenance. It was a groundbreaking revelation, challenging the rigid behaviorist views of the time and highlighting the profound innate psychological need for warmth, security, and physical affection in early development. Harlow's experiments didn't stop at demonstrating the importance of contact comfort. He also explored the devastating consequences of its absence. In a series of even more ethically controversial studies, he subjected infant monkeys to various degrees of social isolation. Some were raised with only the wire mother, never experiencing any contact comfort. Others were placed in total social isolation, in a pit of despair, a dark, confined chamber where they had no interaction with any other living being or even a surrogate mother. The results were profoundly tragic. Monkeys raised in complete isolation exhibited severe and irreversible psychological damage. They became withdrawn, aggressive, unable to interact with other monkeys, and displayed repetitive, self-mutilating behaviors. When later introduced to normal monkeys, they were terrified and socially incompetent, often unable to mate or care for their own offspring. These studies provided a chilling, albeit unethical, demonstration of the critical period for social development and the catastrophic impact of early emotional deprivation. Harlow's work, while undeniably cruel by modern ethical standards, profoundly reshaped our understanding of attachment and early childhood development. His experiments provided compelling evidence that the need for love, affection, and security is a fundamental innate drive, not merely a secondary consequence of feeding. His findings laid the groundwork for John Bowlby's groundbreaking attachment theory, which emphasized the critical importance of a secure emotional bond between an infant and its primary caregiver for healthy psychological and social development. Today, the images of Harlow's isolated monkeys serve as a powerful, albeit tragic reminder of the essential role of early nurturing and emotional connection. They underscore the understanding that humans, like monkeys, are not merely biological machines driven by basic needs, but complex emotional beings whose very survival and well-being depend on the warmth of connection. As you rest, consider the profound and comforting power of touch and the fundamental human need for belonging. We have journeyed through the visible acts of obedience, the subtle pressures of conformity, the chilling paralysis of bystander inaction, the crushing weight of learned helplessness, and the profound, innate cry for contact and comfort. Each experiment, in its own way, peeled back a layer of the human experience, revealing the unseen architectures that shape our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. These are not just historical footnotes, they are fundamental truths woven into the fabric of our being. They remind us that we are not merely individuals adrift, but beings profoundly influenced by our environment, by our past, and by each other. As the night deepens, let these insights gently settle, perhaps offering a new perspective on the complex dance between our inner world and the external forces that perpetually shape it. Allow your mind to wander through these revelations, finding a quiet understanding in their depths.
The bystander effect. From the pressure to conform, we move to a different, yet equally disturbing aspect of group behavior: the failure to act in the face of an emergency. This phenomenon, known as the bystander effect, was brought to the forefront by a horrific event in 1964, the murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Genovese was brutally stabbed outside her apartment building, and despite her prolonged cries for help, it was widely reported that 38 witnesses heard or saw parts of the attack but did nothing to intervene. While the details of the Genovese case have since been debated and often exaggerated, the public outcry sparked intense interest among social psychologists. Why would so many people witnessing a violent crime fail to offer assistance? This question led Bibb Latané and John Darley to conduct a series of experiments that would uncover a chilling truth about human inaction. The more people present in an emergency, the less likely any one individual is to help. It's a paradox of collective presence, where safety in numbers can, in fact, lead to collective apathy. Latané and Darley designed clever experiments to test their hypothesis in controlled settings. One of their most famous studies, conducted in 1968, involved simulating an emergency in a laboratory setting. Participants were led to believe they were part of a discussion group about personal problems, communicating via an intercom system. Crucially, they were told that to ensure anonymity, only one person could speak at a time. During the discussion, one of the Confederates, who had previously mentioned his susceptibility to seizures, would suddenly begin to have a staged seizure. His voice would become distressed, he would stammer, choke, and cry out for help, eventually falling silent. The question for the real participant was, would they intervene? And how would the perceived number of other bystanders affect their decision? The setup was designed to create a genuine moral dilemma, where inaction could lead to serious harm, and intervention carried the risk of social awkwardness or personal inconvenience. The experiment was a crucible for testing the very limits of human empathy and responsibility. The results of the seizure experiment were stark and unequivocal. When participants believed they were the only witness to the emergency, a striking 85% intervened and sought help for the seizing Confederate. They acted quickly, often within a minute. However, when participants believed there was one other bystander present, the rate of intervention dropped significantly to 62%. And most disturbingly, when participants believed there were 4 other bystanders present, only a paltry 31% intervened. Furthermore, those who did intervene in the larger groups took much longer to do so. The experiment clearly demonstrated the phenomenon of diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present, the responsibility to act is spread amongst them, leading each individual to feel less personally accountable. The presence of others, rather than encouraging help, ironically inhibited it. It was a chilling revelation, suggesting that in a crowd, a person in need might be less likely to receive help than if they were alone with a single witness. The experiment exposed a dark irony of human social dynamics, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our collective presence can sometimes lead to individual moral paralysis. The bystander effect has been implicated in numerous real-world tragedies beyond the initial Genovese case, from schoolyard bullying to public assaults. Its findings have profoundly influenced emergency protocols and public awareness campaigns. Knowing about the bystander effect can, paradoxically, help mitigate it. Psychologists now advise that in an emergency, if you need help, you should explicitly point to an individual and give them a direct instruction. You, in the blue shirt, call 911. This breaks the diffusion of responsibility and pluralistic ignorance, singling out an individual and assigning them clear responsibility.
The bystander effect serves as a crucial reminder of our shared humanity and the moral imperative to act even when the collective seems to freeze. It challenges us to override our natural tendencies toward inaction in a crowd and to take individual responsibility, to be the one who steps forward. As the silence deepens around you, consider the power of a single voice, a single act to break the spell of collective indifference.
The Ash Conformity Experiment. From the individual's response to authority and fear, we now shift our focus to the powerful, often invisible forces of group influence. Imagine yourself in a room with several other people, tasked with a simple visual judgment, matching the length of lines. The answer seems obvious, clear as day, yet one by one, everyone else in the room confidently states an answer that is clearly, unequivocally wrong. What do you do? Do you trust your own eyes, or do you succumb to the overwhelming pressure of the group? This was the unsettling premise of Solomon Ash's conformity experiments, conducted in the 1950s. Ash sought to understand the extent to which social pressure from a majority group could influence an individual to conform, even when that majority was demonstrably wrong. His findings would reveal a startling truth about the human need to belong and the fragility of independent thought in the face of collective opinion. Ash's experiment was deceptively simple. Participants were told they were taking part in a study of visual judgment. They were seated in a room with 7 to 9 other individuals, all of whom, unbeknownst to the true participant, were confederates, actors carefully instructed by Ash. The task was straightforward. Compare a standard line to 3 comparison lines and identify which of the comparison lines was the same length as the standard line. The correct answer was always unambiguous, strikingly obvious. The confederates would give their answers first, one by one, before it was the true participants' turn. For the first few trials, everyone, including the confederates, gave the correct answer. This built a sense of normalcy, a false sense of security. But then the pattern shifted. The confederates in unison began to give an incorrect answer, one that was clearly, visibly wrong. The true participant was now faced with a profound dilemma. Trust their own perception, or do they succumb to the overwhelming pressure of the group? This was the unsettling premise of Solomon Ash's conformity experiments, conducted in the 1950s. Ash sought to understand the extent to which social pressure from a majority group could influence an individual to conform, even when that majority was demonstrably wrong. His findings would reveal a startling truth about the human need to belong and the fragility of independent thought in the face of collective opinion. Imagine the scene. A participant, confident in their initial judgment, observes as the first confederate states an obviously wrong answer, perhaps a slight flicker of surprise. Then the second confederate, and the third, and the fourth, all calmly and confidently stating the same incorrect answer. The participant's certainty begins to waver. Is something wrong with their eyes? Are they misunderstanding the instructions? The room fills with an unspoken pressure, a silent demand for conformity. The desire to fit in, to avoid being seen as an outlier, to doubt one's own senses in the face of unanimous opposition becomes almost unbearable. Some participants would fidget, sweat, or show clear signs of distress. Yet, when their turn came, many would utter the same incorrect answer as the group, overriding their own clear perception. Ash's experiment didn't rely on overt threats or rewards. It simply leveraged the inherent human need for social acceptance and the discomfort of standing alone against a perceived majority. Ash's results, like Milgram's, were profoundly unsettling. When participants were tested alone, without the influence of confederates, they made mistakes on less than 1% of the trials, confirming that the task was indeed simple, and the correct answer obvious. However, when placed in the group setting with the confederates giving incorrect answers, a staggering 75% of participants conformed at least once.
On average, participants conformed to the incorrect majority opinion about 1/3 of the time. This meant that, even when faced with an unambiguous truth, a significant number of individuals chose to disregard their own perceptions and align with the group. The experiment highlighted the immense power of social influence, demonstrating that people would rather be wrong with the group than right alone. It revealed the deep-seated human need for belonging and the fear of social rejection, even in a trivial task with strangers. Ash's work provided a stark reminder that our perceptions of reality can be easily swayed by the opinions of others, even when those opinions are demonstrably false. Ash conducted various replications and variations of his experiments to understand the factors that influenced conformity. He found that the size of the majority group played a role, but only to a point. A group of 3 or 4 Confederates elicited nearly as much conformity as a much larger group. The presence of just one dissenting voice, even if that dissenter gave a different incorrect answer, dramatically reduced conformity. This ally effect showed that having just one person to break the unanimity of the group could empower the participant to stand by their own judgment. Public versus private responses also mattered. When participants were allowed to write down their answers privately, conformity rates dropped significantly. This suggested that many instances of conformity were driven by normative social influence, the desire to fit in and be accepted, rather than informational social influence, where one genuinely believes the group is right. Ash's work laid the foundation for understanding how group dynamics can shape individual beliefs and behaviors, providing insights into everything from fashion trends to political movements. The Ash conformity experiments, while not as ethically fraught as Milgram's or Little Albert's, still sparked important discussions about the ethics of deception in psychological research. Participants were not fully informed of the true nature of the study, and some experienced discomfort or embarrassment when the deception was revealed. However, the insights gained were profound. Ash's work offers a critical lens through which to view phenomena like groupthink, cult behavior, and the spread of misinformation. It helps explain why people might go along with bad decisions in corporate boards, why fads gain traction, or why individuals might remain silent in the face of injustice. It reminds us that our autonomy is often more fragile than we perceive, and that the desire to belong can be a powerful, sometimes dangerous motivator. As we drift into the quiet of the night, consider the subtle ways in which the opinions of others shape your own, and the quiet courage it sometimes takes to stand alone, anchored in your own truth.
The Little Albert Experiment. From the complex societal pressures of obedience and roles, we now turn to a more fundamental and perhaps even more chilling exploration of human emotion, the acquisition of fear. Our next stop is 1920, to the laboratory of John B. Watson, often considered the father of behaviorism. Watson believed that human behavior, even complex emotions, could be entirely explained by classical conditioning, a process of learning through association. He famously declared, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select." To prove this radical claim, Watson, along with his assistant Rosalie Rayner, embarked on an experiment that would intentionally induce a phobia in an infant, an act that today is widely condemned for its profound ethical violations. This was the Little Albert Experiment, a stark demonstration of how easily fear can be learned and how deeply it can be ingrained. The subject of this controversial study was Little Albert B., an 11-month-old infant. Watson and Rayner first established Albert's baseline reactions. They presented him with various objects: a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, masks, and a burning newspaper. Albert, curious and unafraid, showed no fear towards any of these stimuli. He even reached out to touch the white rat, demonstrating a natural affinity. This established the unconditioned stimulus, the white rat, as neutral, eliciting no fear response. The unconditioned response, the lack of fear, was clearly observed. The researchers then prepared their unconditioned stimulus for fear, a large, heavy steel bar.
When struck with a hammer, this bar produced a sudden, extremely loud noise, a noise known to naturally startle and frighten infants. The stage was now set for the deliberate conditioning of fear to prove Watson's hypothesis that even complex emotions like phobias could be manufactured through simple associative learning. The conditioning phase began. Watson and Rayner would present little Albert with the white rat. The moment Albert reached out to touch the rat, the steel bar behind him would be struck with the hammer, producing a sudden, terrifyingly loud clang. Albert, startled and distressed, would jump, whimper, and cry. This pairing was repeated numerous times over several sessions. The neutral stimulus, the white rat, was consistently paired with the unconditioned stimulus, the loud noise, which naturally elicited an unconditioned response of fear. The goal was to create an association in Albert's mind. White rat equals terrifying noise. With each repetition, the fear response intensified, becoming more immediate and pronounced. The researchers were systematically, deliberately, and effectively wiring a phobia into an infant's developing mind, demonstrating the raw power of classical conditioning to shape emotional reactions. After just a few sessions, the conditioning was complete. Little Albert now exhibited a profound fear response to the white rat, even without the accompanying loud noise. The rat, once a source of innocent curiosity, had become a conditioned stimulus, eliciting a conditioned response of fear and avoidance. But the experiment revealed an even more disturbing phenomenon: stimulus generalization. Albert's fear was not confined to just the white rat. He began to show fear towards other furry white objects: a white rabbit, a furry dog, a Santa Claus mask, and even a white fur coat. His fear had generalized, spreading to any object resembling the original feared stimulus. This demonstrated how phobias once established could easily expand their reach. The ethical implications of intentionally inducing such distress and a lasting phobia in an infant are by modern standards unconscionable. Little Albert's mother, a wet nurse at the hospital where the experiment took place, removed him from the study before Watson and Rayner could attempt to decondition his fear. The fate of little Albert, whether his phobias persisted throughout his life, remains unknown, a haunting question mark hanging over one of psychology's most controversial studies. The little Albert experiment, while ethically indefensible by today's standards, profoundly influenced the field of psychology. It provided empirical evidence for Watson's behaviorist theories, demonstrating that fear and potentially other emotions could be learned through environmental conditioning, rather than being innate or purely internal. This shifted the focus of psychological research from introspection and unobservable mental states to observable behaviors. However, its most enduring legacy might be its role in catalyzing the development of strict ethical guidelines for research involving human subjects. The profound harm inflicted upon little Albert served as a stark warning, forcing the scientific community to acknowledge the paramount importance of informed consent, minimization of harm, and the right to withdraw from studies. Today, such an experiment would never be permitted. The story of little Albert stands as a somber reminder of the ethical responsibilities inherent in the pursuit of knowledge, a chilling testament to the potential for scientific inquiry to cross moral boundaries when unchecked. As we navigate these historical pathways, it's crucial to pause and consider the immense weight of responsibility borne by those who seek to understand the human mind. Each experiment, however flawed or ethically dubious in retrospect, was born from a desire to illuminate the unknown, to unravel the mysteries of our existence. But with this pursuit comes a profound obligation to protect the very subjects who offer themselves to the crucible of scientific inquiry. The stories of Milgram and little Albert serve as potent reminders that the human psyche is not merely a collection of variables to be manipulated, but a delicate, complex system deserving of the utmost respect and care. The lessons learned from these controversial studies have shaped the ethical frameworks that govern research today,
ensuring that the quest for knowledge does not come at the cost of human dignity. Let these reflections settle your mind as we prepare to explore further into the depths of psychological discovery.